Welcome to Radical Personal Finance, a show dedicated to providing you with the knowledge, skills, insight, and encouragement you need to live a rich and meaningful life now while building a plan for financial freedom in 10 years or less. My name is Joshua Sheets. I am your host, and on today's show, I am thrilled to have a guest that I have been excited to talk to ever since I first came across your work. Mr. Stanley Schmidt, welcome to Radical Personal Finance.
Thank you.
So
I'm happy to be here.
I'd like to tell you and the listeners how I discovered your work, because this will, I think, get our conversation started today on the right foot. I was unfamiliar with anything that you had done a couple of years ago. Then I was out looking around the internet and I was looking for personal finance curricula. I was trying to see what personal finance options might be available to teach personal finance to children, to adolescents, to school-age children. This is my part-time hobby, and I had seen some of the things that were out there, but I didn't really like many of them. And as I was wandering around the web searching for personal finance curriculum, I stumbled across your website and I found the sales materials that you have available for Life of Fred Financial Choices. And on your website, you offer kind of an introduction and one chapter, and as well as a full table of contents for each of your books. And I started reading through your table of contents for your Financial Choices book. And I said, wait a second. All my life, I have been reading personal finance books. All my life, literally. I think I've read most of what's out there, or at least I'm aware of it. And for the first time in my life, here is an author who has put down some of the concepts that I teach. And no one else that I've ever come across actually teaches these things.
Oh, beautiful.
And so that's actually what launched me into your work. And I said, if this guy's smart enough to write this table of contents for a finance book, because I immediately understood all of the concepts you were teaching, and I thought this is exactly what I would put into a curriculum. So then I started buying your math books, and I started taking my children through your math books. And at the moment, I don't quite have a complete set of Life of Fred books. Currently, my set stops at the trigonometry. We haven't gotten to calculus or your upper level math yet. But other than that, and other than your beginning reader series, I own all of the books that you have published. I've got about, it's about two and a half feet of one of my bookshelves dedicated to Life of Fred books. And my school-age homeschooled children go through them every single day. So thank you for writing the Life of Fred series.
You're very welcome.
Now that hopefully we've gotten off on a little bit of a right foot, now you know why I wanted to talk to you. I just want to say welcome to the podcast, and I'm excited to do this interview because I want to spend some time talking about your personal story. I'd like to talk a little bit about your work in writing books, especially a little bit of your financial work, and also I would like to then dig into some of your ideas and perceptions and work in the field of education. So I'd like to understand a little bit about your life and career, though. What was your path to becoming an author?
I knew no one when I first wrote my first book. When I was 22 years old, the month I turned 22, I was a full-time high school teacher in a government school. Which makes me very young when there's 18-year-old students running around. And in the first semester I taught, I had a geometry class, and I drew Fred on the blackboard. It came out of nowhere, and talked about something like Fred going fishing or something like that. And over the 3 years that I taught high school, I gradually introduced other little stories about Fred. One of the students was so enthused with it all, he went to his metal shop class and made me a metal Fred belt buckle. And then I got my master's degree in mathematics and could then teach at the junior college level, which I did for 11 years. And over the space of the 11 years, occasionally I would bring Fred on the blackboard and have part of his life and how that made mathematics come alive for that particular topic. In the last semester I was teaching, I had a second semester calculus class, and in the last third of that we had stuff on applications. And so I started that section all of a sudden 2/3 of the way through the semester by saying Fred was born on the western slopes of the Siberian mountains. And the students, these college students, they looked, what's going on? And then I talked about Fred in his early years and wove into his life story all the calculus applications. At that time, I was driving my second grade daughter off to school every morning. And I told her the same story that I told the calculus students, except excising out the calculus part. After I retired myself, 18 years later, my daughter called me, and you know how kids can be very delicate with their language.
Oh, indeed.
She said, Dad, before you die, you should write this stuff down. Sorry, I'm feeling very healthy, thank you. But I never thought of doing that. You know, you sit in front of a blank computer screen. Oh, what are the sizes of the margins? What's an ISBN number? Where do I find a printer? I had all kinds of questions. And in the space of 3 years, I wrote Life of Fred Calculus, which covers 16 units of calculus, the first 2 years of college level calculus stuff. You know, and when the book came back from the printers, you hold it in your hands, my baby. You know, I never thought I would see such a thing in my life. And then I wrote beginning algebra book, and you know, and continued on from there. And so that was the start of my becoming an author late in life. And things have sort of developed from there. I'm not sure what to say next.
Wow. So I want to focus on I want to probe just a moment on something that will be very interesting to my office. You retired, it sounds like perhaps in your mid-30s. Is that correct?
36 years old.
How did you do that?
You send in a notice to your department chairman. I will not be coming back next semester. That's how you retire. It was a tenured position. I enjoyed teaching, but I didn't want to do that to the age of 65 and then get the gold watch or whatever they do for retirement and say, gee, I missed it, whatever it was. And so I retired myself, headed off to an A-frame on 6 acres in the woods outside of Santa Rosa, California, to listen to see, okay, God, what you got in mind for me? Please, please don't send me to Africa.
Right.
That was my prayer. And listened for 10 years for what would be my next direction. I wanted to live life deliberately rather than by accident. At the end of those 10 years in 1990, I looked at California and the income taxes going up to something like 13%. And I'm moving next door to Nevada where the income taxes are 0. And that saves me, 1 year out of every 8 in my life that would have been dumped into California Treasury. And I moved here then in 1990 and been here for 34 years. Help.
Did you?
What's next?
Did you did you practice what today we would call extreme savings, a high savings rate with your income? What allowed you to accumulate enough money to retire so early?
I've never had a savings account in my life, and I've never bought any bonds or treasury bills or anything like that at all. Never had a budget ever. But I don't spend a whole lot of money just because, why? I've got a set of shirts from Davis, Dickies shirts rather, and a pair of Dickies pants, and I'm very comfortable with those. And the last 3 years that I was teaching, I also got into doing real estate. And bought single family and multiple family houses in the East Bay of California, San Francisco Bay Area, and fixed them up and did the plumbing and electrical and stuff as much as I could by myself. And in 2.5 years, said, it's time. I quit the college teaching. I sold all the real estate in the Bay Area there that I had and moved to the A-frame. That's what allowed me to retire at the age of 36, which is faster than than many people retire at.
So you worked, earned an income, you were naturally frugal, didn't see any reason to spend excessively, took your savings into real estate, and then the real estate grew in value. And then by selling that, you were able to have enough to live on at such a young age. Is that right?
That is correct, yes.
Great.
I mean, I have a fountain pen collection on my desk, but the fountain pens I buy, I like fountain pens. They just attracted me, so that's my hobby. But I buy them on Amazon, 4 fountain pens for $10. That's not going to break me.
Indeed not.
That's my expensive hobby.
What has so you've written, I'm not sure how many books we would call it. I mean, perhaps 30 books?
I would call it 64 books. 64 books.
So you've written over the last decade 64 books. Has that been the primary way that you have invested your time, or are there other activities that retiring early you were able to pursue?
It was not over the last decade, but since 1998, I've written books. What other activities? Of course, there's church on Sunday mornings and choir practice on Thursday nights. At one point, I was single for 15 years. And when you are in your 30s and 40s and you are what's called single, solvent, and straight, you don't have to advertise at all. They come and get you, because the women at that age are ticking time bombs in terms of the last chance for babies. And so I had a lot of wonderful dating experiences during those years.
Right.
So you are. Let's see what else I did. I also lent money as through the real estate. Brokerage companies to people that were really on the edge of having their places foreclosed, and I would lend money to them to stop their foreclosures, and then they would owe me rather than owe the bank. It was one thing I did. I did a lot of reading. I still do. Usually 70 to 80 nonfiction books a year on all kinds of subjects, whether it's poetry or Christianity, or artificial intelligence, or whatever else. I find that I'm learning more per year now at my advanced age than I was in any year I was at the university. You pick out what subjects you like, and you read them, and there's no tests, and there's no final examinations, and no homework. It's wonderful.
You also have, the way I think of learning is that learning is the science of making connections. And so as you grow older and have learned more, your total knowledge has a greater surface area. So new knowledge has an easier time of making connections. And so ideally, the hardest learning we ever do in learning science, the hardest learning we ever do is the first learning. And as we get older, It should be easier and easier for us to learn more and more, because our total knowledge has more surface area onto which new pieces of knowledge and understanding can attach more easily and make more connections.
I found that to be very true. Because of that, in my Life of Fred books, I also include poetry. I include sometimes a little bit of sheet music. I include all kinds of stuff. In the 3 books for the middle school or junior high is what it used to be called, which are 3 pre-algebra books. I include a lot of physics in the first one, a lot of biology in the second, and a lot of economics in the third one. My son-in-law, who has been teaching for over a decade high school physics, read my middle school Life of Fred physics book, and he said, "There's stuff in there I didn't know." So I wasn't being skimpy on the physics that I was imparting. So I have all kinds of stuff in these books, besides just math.
I really love it. And, just as a testimonial from your readers, I find that one of my children, whenever I get new Life of Fred books, will just read them just straight through, just for fun, not doing any of the exercises and things like that, just reading them, just because he's interested in the information. And then we go back through and do the exercises. But let me give, for the audience's benefit, on your sales page for your Life of Fred books. This is the Life of Fred pre-algebra book with physics. There's 3 different pre-algebra books. And so here are some of the topics covered: numerals, making models, 19 conversion factor problems, area of a rectangle, friction independent of speed, constants of proportionality, exact speed of light, continuous and discrete variables, story of the meter, pendulums, oblate spheroids, krypton versus kryptonite, square roots, pilgrims in Massachusetts in 1620, hard C and soft C, normal forces, coefficient of friction, solving D equals RT for R, how ducks pronounce moo, graphing points, ordered pairs, why rocks stop falling, and it continues. That's just 3 lines out of about 15 or 16 lines in your of showing the different topics. And so I do love how wonderfully integrated the knowledge and information that you have woven through the books is. It's really good. And as you say, I think one of your sayings is you teach students, not subjects. That's your basic outlook on education. Is that right?
Unless your students are robots, then you could teach just math, and here's procedure number 1, and here's procedure number 2, and so on. But not for kids. That's horrible to abuse them that way. The government-run schools do that. They teach 50 minutes worth of history, ring a bell. They walk to another room and they teach 50 minutes worth of English, ring a bell, and so on. That's compartmentalized knowledge that way is nuts.
Absolutely. So you were a homeschooler, right? You homeschooled your daughter, is that right?
Now, we were back in the 1980s, and it was dad and daughter, single dad, which is an unusual configuration in American society. But that was the way it was. She's elected to be with me rather than with the mother. And she was in the 8th grade, and we're there. And I sent her off to 8th grade school. And she came home after a week or 2, and she says, "Dad, I'm not learning anything," which I believed. She said, "Dad, what are we going to do?" Oh my God, when you're a single dad and you get questions like that, you go blank. Oh my gosh, I had never read about what you're supposed to do. And there was no homeschooling back there in the 1980s. And we kicked around for a week or 2 or 3, and I found a correspondence school, Newport Pacific out of Connecticut, and that offered the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grades. Well, that's a possibility. I showed them to my daughter, and she looked at them, and she said, "Yeah, I'd like to try that." Now, there's a cost, right, to correspondence schools, and you pay it all in one chunk at the beginning. But now, between you and me and every other parent who's listening to us here, there's a trick. I said to my daughter, "Sure, you pay that one fee in front, and when you finish the courses, I will pay you back." This was great because it avoids the eighth grader turning and saying after 3 weeks, "I don't like to do this anymore," and then quitting. It becomes very motivational that way around. So we ordered the books, and they all came for the 9th, 10th, and 11th and 12th grades, all the books. And I have pictures, photographs in her album of her carrying the books into the house. And the week after that, she looked at me and said, "Dad," always it starts with a dad. And she says, "I'd like to stay home today and do my correspondence course instead of going to school." So we think again, all right, it's me. What do I do? Okay, here's the deal. 5 hours of study time. And if you do that, I will write a note that says, "Please excuse my daughter from school yesterday," and sign it. And we had a clock that was a stop and go clock, and we could time her that she spent 5 hours total in the chair for that day. She did it. I wrote the note, and it said, just please excuse my daughter. No reason given. And then signed my name. And the government-run school says they bought it. No problems, no back, because they got money for excused absences, the same as if the kid were sitting there. Next week, she said to me, Dad, I want to do it again. Okay, we did it again. In the week after that, she said, Dad, I'd like to spend Monday, Wednesday, and Friday home. And I said, 5 hours in the chair. And she did it. I would write the notes for Tuesday and Thursday and the next time around. And they was excused from school. And she, on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, was at home learning stuff. And on Tuesday and Thursday, she was sitting in the classrooms at the government school and making A's in all of her classroom stuff because it was so retarded. All right. This is the fall semester. In December, my daughter had completed the 9th grade and the 10th grade and the 11th and the 12th grade. And by Christmas, she had in her hand a high school diploma at 13 and a half.
Amazing.
And so I turned to her and I asked her, okay, we've got several choices. You can stay in the government-run school or you can go off to college, because the college required either you be 18 years old, which didn't apply to her. You could have a GED degree, but you had to be 16 years old to get that. Or you could have a high school diploma. She had that. Whoa, she says, I'm going to college, 13 and a half. Okay, so for the spring semester, for incoming students, the junior college in Santa Rosa there required that she meet with an incoming counselor. That was what they did for all the new freshman students. She said, Dad, you got to drive me. For some reason, at 13 and a half, she couldn't drive. I think it was a government regulation. So we went off found the counselor's room, and I didn't want to be a part of that at all. It's scary. But a little tiny room. So she sat there with the counselor, and I sat as far back as I could in the room, just hiding. And the counselor interviewed my daughter, and he said, well, what kind of direction are you heading? University direction, yada, yada, for 10 minutes of official stuff. And then at that point, my daughter turned to the counselor and said, I'm 13 and a half. And I melted in my chair. Oh gosh, we're going to get kicked out. It'll be horrible. I was just, why did she have to open her mouth? The counselor turned to her, smiled, giggled, and said, you're the youngest kid at the college here. It's wonderful. Oh, and for the next 20 minutes, that pair of women yada each other and excited and all very affirming. And so that was the beginning of her college career. So high schooling, you get to walk around the government regulations is what you have to do. Nowadays, homeschooling is very much more popular than it was back then. But we did the equivalent of that. And on all her resumes that she wrote for her working life, graduated from high school at 13 and a half was right at the beginning of that.
That's wonderful. What was the fullness of her college career? What did she wind up studying, and how long did it take her?
Well, I told her when she started the things, I said, we're not in a hurry, kid. You have plenty of time. And she enrolled very light courses to begin with, including a couple PE courses. And went along gently, and that was just fine. In one of the, I think, biology lab courses, one of the 18-year-old guys invited her out on a date because my daughter was at that time on her chest developed enough. And she turned to him and she says, I'm 13 and a half. And he melted. Oh, jailbait. So that eliminated that side on that. In terms of her academic ability is up there, obviously. But her social and psychological needs were at the 13-year-old level. So I deliberately kept her in the church youth groups, for example. So she had plenty of girlfriends to interact with of her own age. And very often I'd turn to her and I'd say, okay, pick out a girlfriend, phone her up, and then the three of us will go out for dinner and a movie. And we did that a bunch of times so that she could connect with ones, because we were living out in the A-frame in the woods, and this was a chance for her to get to physically be with other girls. And we did that a whole bunch to do her psychological levels. Now, what broke it up a little bit was when she was 15 or almost 15, she came home from the Methodist youth group and she said, Dad, that was always the thing I said. When she started with Dad, I was starting to wonder what was coming next. She said, the speaker today, or this evening, was talking about being a foreign exchange student. I never heard of, didn't know anybody who had ever been a foreign exchange student. And I said, and she says, can I go? I said, give me 48 hours to think about it a little bit, please. And after 48 hours, I said, sure. You want to go? We're not in a hurry. So she headed off. She said, well, Germany has already been taken. There's no slots in Germany, but they've got a slot in the Netherlands. And I turned to her and I said, do you know how close the Netherlands are to Holland? And she didn't know. but in the year that she was gone, she learned. She also learned Dutch enough that she could hear it, understand it, write it, and think in it, and picked up German besides. So that when she came home at the age of 16, instead of 15 when she left, I had a daughter that was trilingual. Then she headed on. She chose linguistics as her major at Berkeley. And then after that, she said to me, you know what she said? She said, Dad, I'd like to be an attorney. So I paid for 3 years of her heading back east to get past the law degree. So that was her kind of the arc of her educational life.
Do you think, in hindsight, and let me, before I just ask the question, let me give you just a little bit of background.
Good.
I was an unusual teenager myself, that from the time I was about 15, I always knew that I was going to homeschool my children. There aren't a lot of 15-year-old young men wandering around knowing that they're planning to homeschool their children. So I was rather unusual with regard to that. So I've paid attention for more than 2 decades now to topics in education, especially alternative methods of education, alternative pathways, things like that. And I currently have 5 children who I homeschool. And in that process, if we were to go back around 10 years ago, my ambition for my children, looking at how watered down and weakened much of the modern school curriculum has become, my ambition for my children 10 years ago would have been to basically swap out high school and just do college instead. I am aware of plenty of students who have done it. They've finished a college degree, an undergraduate degree, by the time they're 18 years old. And so that was my plan 10 years ago. I had it all charted out. But over the last decade, I've thought a lot about that, and I've basically discarded that as a plan. And I've said, no, I think that it's less important to have a college degree at 18 than it is to stay with your peers developmentally. Because although you can get a college degree in your teenage years, if you have reasonable academic abilities, you're not going to get anything like the benefits you could get from it if your brain is a little bit more mature, because the earth has gone around the sun a few more times. and
Mhm.
also that college is not all about academics. And I posed this question to Susan Wise Bauer, who is a well-known kind of homeschool advisor and written various books. And she also went to school at 16. And her advice was, she said, just go deep, not wide. So, or excuse me, I can't remember if it was wide or deep. Anyway, the point is that you can learn more in the high school years. You don't have to just settle for the equivalent of a GED to check the box and say, all right, I've got the standard high school done. You can learn more, and then still the child will have the benefit of staying with his or her peers as the years go by. So with that background, I ask you, with hindsight, do you think that going to college early was, if you were doing it over again 40 years later or 50 years later, would you make the same decision, or would you say some version of, hey, you know what, let's definitely study abroad, let's slow you down, and let's just save college for 18, and let's just do more in high school rather than just going through the government school? What would you do if you were doing it over again?
We're doing it now.
You're right.
Rather than doing it back then.
Right.
I've got a third alternative, neither one of which you've addressed, which is what I want my 4 grandchildren to be doing. I don't want them to go to college at all. It is insane nowadays. They don't learn anything. They're indoctrinated with the wokeism. The whole society is corrupt. The tuition is extremely expensive. They become a debt slave with student loans not being able to bankrupt out of them. It is insane to go to college today. Many employers now realize that the people that have a college degree don't know anything a lot of times, and the employers have to resort to giving exams for people that are applying for positions to find out what they really know. It's the whole world is turned upside down. Now the kids listen to society more than they listen to their folks or their grandparents, and they head off dutifully to college. Except if you were in STEM, science and technology, engineering, math, there you might have some stuff. But it's insane to get a French history, literature degree or whatever else that it's garbage. Study anthropology, or like many women do, enroll in psychology, because the default things, those are worthless in today's world. Reading is you don't have to get dressed. You don't have to attend the classes, sit in the hard seats, listen to a teacher that is either going too fast or too slow. And that's all nuts nowadays. The internet, including you and the internet, have so much more to offer, and the price is very reasonable. The world is turned upside down. Keep the kids with their own age groups. That, like you said, but turn them loose in terms of going into the world. And you want the kid to get an MBA, Master's in Business Administration, or should they just start a business? And they'll learn a heck of a lot more starting a business, even if they fail a couple of times. Was it Disney that went bankrupt 7 times? It's the right way to do things. So skip college, skip the university for the most part.
I respect that argument, and I have a couple of podcasts dedicated to it because it's more. I used to hold the position that you're describing now. That's another one of my changes over the last 10 years. But, years ago, I did a podcast called The 5 Basic Functions of College, and how to basically, I can't remember my title. It was like the 5 basic functions of college and how to maximize them or do better even without college. Because what you're saying is extremely true. So, for example, one of the functions of college that's not academic, one of the functions of college is building a network. But today, I could teach a motivated 15-year-old how to build a world-class network, never ever attending class, just simply by being able to connect with people and have direct access, writing and publishing online, connecting with people with online connections, following those up with visits to conferences, visits to conventions that are related to the subject of interest, starting a media brand, a podcast, something where you're interviewing people. I could teach the 15-year-old how to build a far better network than most college students ever get from their college tuition. And we could go through and affirm that argument on basically every dimension. That a self-taught physicist right now is the closest to making mankind interplanetary, much more effective than people with formal physics degrees in terms of inspiring it and making things happen. And I agree with those things. However, I think there are a couple of variables that can often be played with. And so the first variable that would need to be discussed is at what cost. So if college is free, then all of a sudden it changes the calculus a little bit. And that would be kind of the first lever I would push on, that for somebody who's an effective student in the United States, basically my operating mindset is that college should be free. And it basically is free for somebody who understands how the various aid programs work, scholarship programs work, the school's award packages, depending on the income of the parents, things like that. And so if there's no out-of-pocket cost for college, then all of a sudden now you look at it through a different lens. The next thing I would say is, while I wholeheartedly agree with you that we need to be careful about who is going to be teaching and indoctrinating our children, and do these people share our values, I also know of people who so assiduously avoided engagement with the system of formal academics that when they finally became aware of what their parents had sheltered them from, they were basically sitting ducks for a false ideology, and they didn't have any kind of defense mechanism built up. And I honestly think that it's better to plan that our children are going to face a full onslaught of ideologies and ideas that you and I as parents or grandparents would disagree with, but that they're fully immunized against those ideas from careful study and from the ability to to defeat those arguments due to being exposed to them and immunized against them and taught logically to the way to work through them. And then in addition to that, for every school that is hardcore woke, there's another school that is anti-woke. And so there's been such a growth of options and in different schools that there are schools that will align with your values, whatever your values wind up being. And my observation over the years about college is that, number one, college is, while you don't need college to succeed, and there's a good argument about causation and correlation with regard to whether or not students who go to college are successful because of college or whether they're successful and they would have been successful without college. The data indicates that people with a college degree have much lower rates of unemployment than those who don't have a college degree. And the doors of society can open up much more effectively to people who have the appropriate sheepskins hanging on their walls. And so an autodidact is often going to be more fully educated than somebody who exclusively goes through a system. But I would say that you yourself sell more books because on your author name you have a PhD behind your name. And so paying attention to these external signals and then finding some appropriate way through it based upon the individuality of the student, those are my arguments for why I've retreated a little bit from my anti-college position and rather say let's look for a way through it that can kind of satisfy all these different things. What do you think?
Okay, I'm going to address your points one by one. The being exposed to and immunized against false ideologies. If you expose somebody to smallpox directly, they fall dead, kind of business. To expose a freshman student to these woke ideas where the teacher holds the grading and passing of the course, that's too much pressure against the student. He is forced to spit out the evil that is taught him. It's too much in terms of not just being exposed to it. In terms of for every woke school, there's an anti-woke school, if I heard you correctly. Okay, there's Hillsdale University. Okay, I've named it. There's 1,000 woke schools and very few anti-woke schools. So that's my argument against that statement of yours. And third, the surveys that say that if you've got a college degree, you have higher employment stuff than if you don't have a college degree. That's a mistake in statistics, which I talk about in the statistics books, because you're comparing those people with college degrees with those without. And of course, people with college degrees have higher employment, but that's not because of the college degrees, but because of a third factor, namely IQ, that causes college degree recipients to have a higher IQ than non-college students. And therefore, it's that third factor that causes employment to be better. So you're quoting me a false statistic there in terms of college degrees versus non-college degrees imply higher employment. Those are my three arguments against you.
What do you think? What do you think about my comment on at what cost? Meaning that if let's say that somebody offered you, let's say that your student is looking at a full ride, 100% scholarship, room, tuition, board, travel to conferences, etc., for a science or physics or biology degree from Harvard University at $0 out of pocket. How do you assess that in your thinking as compared to going deeply in debt?
You didn't want me to oppose all four of your statements. I just opposed three of them. I'm sorry. I'm not that ornery. Okay, college for free.
Yeah.
Which is the contrast to the internet for free. Boy, that would be very tempting. Stanford. The average undergraduate grade today at Stanford, the average grade is A-. And I believe Harvard is very close to that. There's no pressure there to really achieve at all in a Harvard/Stanford environment. That would be a real temptation. You want to go to Harvard for free, other than the snow that's there. I can't respond to that one. I don't know. So I have to just oppose the other three arguments you had.
Fair enough. Well, maybe you think about it for a few months and then call me back, and I'd love to do it, because I spend most of my day arguing with myself back and forth, and so having someone else to argue with makes my day. It's far more interesting. Let me choose which direction to go here. I'd like to go back to the books that you wrote. So you answered a question that I had, which was that you started with calculus, and then it sounds like you worked your way back. When did you go ahead and start writing early, like very young, your beginning mathematics series?
Or the beginning readers series, which teaches kids how to read. It sort of bounced around. I did calculus, then I believe beginning algebra, then advanced algebra, and at that point, it's a kind of blizzard in my head because it's that many years ago. It was in the early 2000s. And, I write, and I'm called to write. I get up at 4:00 every morning, and it's pretty quiet then. The wife is still sleeping. And I can write for 2 hours. That's my brightest time of day. You got me right now at 2 p.m. That's my dumbest time of day. And I wrote whatever is called to me next. Most recent stuff I've done is 10 college level books. in mathematics. So I've basically completed a complete undergraduate major in mathematics is offered through Life of Fred now. But I went and earlier in the time, I did the high school stuff and then the junior high physics, biology, and economics, and then did 13 books. Apples, butterflies, cats, dogs, they're alphabetized. But to teach kids from kindergarten through fourth grade. And then in fifth and sixth grade, it was fractions and decimals and percents. And you just sort of fill in things as to how the wind is blowing in your skull at the time.
Yeah. I have your chemistry book, I have your logic book, and I have your financial planning or financial decisions book. Are you working on a physics book? A standalone physics book?
I don't need it. The stuff that you read in the physics book, that is equivalent to any high school physics book right there. There is nothing I've left out of for that. So I've done a high school book in terms of being comprehensive enough. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not called to do more physics or more chem. I've done the chem at the high school level already.
What are you writing about now? What do you think may still be coming?
Each time when I finish a book, I turn to my wife and I say, I can't think of anything else to be doing. And she nods her head and says, "We just wait," and then out pops another book. But I can't right now, truthfully, think of another book. History. No, the stuff that I've read in history is so good. I'm reading right now Guns of August by Barbara Tuchman. This is 600 pages of the history of the first month of World War I. And I find that fascinating, but to stir Fred into that story would be kind of artificial.
Yes.
You stick him there and it just, it would be clunky. And I've done the 4 English books, high school level English books, in addition. And it was at high school level because before high school, let the kids read good literature that's age appropriate for them. And they will pick up a lot of, where to put the commas and the rest. And then my 4 high school English books cement it all down. So that, for fun, okay, hat, and the plural is hats with adding an S. If you have dress, you could add an ES to pluralize it, right? That's 2 different ways.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm going to put Joshua on the hot seat here. How many different ways are there possible? Make a guess to make plurals of English words. Just for fun, we're playing here.
Let me think for just a moment. I like it.
Thank you.
I don't know.
You're right. How about 15?
Really? That's astonishing.
Besides hippopotamus and hippopotami, there are 15 ways. And I list them all in the book. I do stuff that no other English teacher does.
Right.
In the chemistry book that you said you have the chemistry book. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't have the students do any experiments at home. Why? Because we live in a very litigious society, and some kid is going to kill himself doing the mildest experiments, stirring water into dirt and making mud. He'd kill himself, and then I'd be sued. So all of the experiments are done by Fred in the book. Now, one of the experiments using high school lab equipment, Fred is able to compute how many grams a hydrogen atom weighs. Now, no other chemistry book I've ever read can compute the number of ways a helium atom, for example, weighs. But Fred does it. I do stuff that is, is different than, because I have enough knowledge, I can write that stuff down. Can we play another one just for fun?
Sure, go for it.
The biology book. Okay, this is
the problem
junior
is
high
that
biology.
the problem is this, that I bought the books and they're on my bookshelf, but I haven't read them. So
That's wonderful, because then you're vulnerable here. Okay,
Exactly.
you ready?
Go ahead.
Because then you're not reciting known facts. You've got a tree that grows in the forest, and suppose it's 6 tons. It weighs 6 tons. Big tree. Okay, I haven't lost you yet.
Yep, got it.
Suppose a third of that tree is water.
Okay.
2 tons out of the 6 is water.
Right.
So ignore the water part. You've got the 4 tons of non-water tree. Now, the water came from the roots. That's easy. But where did the 4 tons of, I don't know, cellulose, whatever you call it, cellulose, where did that 4 tons come from? It didn't come from the ground, because if it did, you'd walk in the forest and you'd see a big indentation under each tree. Where did the 4 tons come from? Real easy question. Obvious one.
I have never thought about
that. But you never thought of that?
No, never have.
Right, but it's an obvious one.
Indeed.
Where did this 4 tons of water come from? Of non-water come from? You know, that's biology, folks.
Right.
And I give the the students a multiple choice question answer to that question. 1, fairy dust. B, unknown. C, it came from the air. Or D, it came from dust settling on the tree.
And it would be dust settling on the tree plus the air plus the sunlight? I don't know. What's the answer?
Oh, yeah. All right. In air, what's the major gas component of air?
Carbon.
You breathe it every day.
Right.
No,
oxygen.
No, the major one. 80% is what? No.
Nitrogen.
No.
I hated biology. I didn't have Life of Fred.
No, you don't. This is in high school chem.
That's what I'm saying. I hated biology when I was in school.
I never took it. I never took a biology course, so I wrote the book. 80% is nitrogen. Roughly 20% is oxygen. And then we have little trace gases. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is, 1 out of every 2,000 molecules in the air is carbon dioxide.
Okay.
Which all of the woke people hate, right? They bitch about that all the time.
Right.
Well, it is the carbon dioxide that is taken into the plant, and the carbon is cracked off, and the oxygen is thrown away out into the air, and the carbon, along with the hydrogen and oxygen from the water, is formed into cellulose, sugars, and starches.
Mm-hmm.
It is air that creates the trees. Now, the minute I tell you what the word is, you're going to say, oh, yes, I knew that. Photosynthesis.
Right.
You knew it, now
right.
You know it.
Right.
That's what photosynthesis is. But most people have had biology like crazy. They don't know where the tree came from.
You never stop and
connect stuff.
Yeah, well, that's so. As I understand, and just
isn't it fun?
It is, and that would be, as I understand your philosophy from your writings, is that the whole point of the way that you have written your books is that Fred has a problem that he needs a solution to, and so, for example, with math, he needs the math that is being taught in the lesson to solve some problem in Fred's quite wacky and zany life. And so he has the problem, it creates the problem, and then the math creates the solution that we learn about. And so I would say that this, to me, is very important that we pay attention to, because even just in the question that you ask, and thankfully, there is a movement in this direction for inquiry-based learning. And we know from modern learning science, we know that this is the foundation of good learning. But if you start by teaching a student about photosynthesis, the student may or may not remember something about photosynthesis. I still remember the first time I learned about photosynthesis. Okay, it's something about how trees make like energy from light. Great, got it. But when you ask a question as to where does the tree come from, then now you're looking for an answer. And so now it's it's a hugely more memorable way to learn about photosynthesis than it is just to be taught what photosynthesis is. And you do that really well, even in just the commentary that you've just given. So it's fantastic, and that's what I think the books
Thank
are.
you, Joshua.
So I'd like to go ahead.
It's Fred's life is what is in the books, and then in his life he encounters something, and then we solve it.
Yeah. And he has quite a zany and unusual life, which is quite fun. The book that I'd like you to write an economics book. And I know that you have your pre-algebra book.
Did.
I know that you have your pre-algebra book with economics, but I'd love it if there were a way that you could even go deeper with a standalone book, because you've got your statistics book. That was the one I thought was missing, and then I just checked your website, and I discover now that you have a statistics book that I don't have yet, and then you have your logic book. And in terms of the sciences, here let me describe what I'm saying. So I don't have a huge degree of respect for the basic outline of what the high school standards are for many classes. And so I think that in the same way that what excited me about your curriculum for math was that you go into undergraduate math, I think that your undergraduate math books are accessible to teenagers who have worked their way through them. I don't know that yet, but I think that'll be the case. And I think the same thing is what's happening, especially in the sciences, that there's two classes of people. There's kind of the standard class who, okay, let me just pass a biology class just so I can get the high school credit. That's what I was in high school with regards to biology. And then there's the really dedicated biology students that are really mastering things at a very high level. And what I love is when somebody is passionate about the subject, it makes it much more enticing to go deeper into the subject than the standard rubric of knowledge. Right. And so you can comment on that, but let me ask you my next question. I'd like to ask about accelerated learing. Do you think that...
Well, you were on economics a second ago.
Yes. Well, so okay, let me just pause. So have you thought about writing an economics book that goes farther than the
When I
concepts
answer that question first,
go ahead.
Before you go to the accelerating one. Okay. With regard to economics, when I wrote the physics book for middle schoolers, I have more physics in there than is in high school curriculum. When I wrote the economics thing, the same is true. Excuse me. One of the most important parts of economics is Ricardos Law of Comparative Advantage. Have you ever heard of that? Ricardos Law of Comparative Advantage.
Perhaps.
Yeah,
maybe.
Very few people have.
I don't know.
I love it, Joshua. You are wonderful. Yes, no, maybe. Okay. If I can both mow somebody's grass and I can paint their house, and I've got two choices of one thing to the other or both, and the other fellow across the street can mow lawn and also paint houses. This is Ricardo's Law of Comparative Advantage.
Right.
And you can have that with countries or people. It doesn't matter what the particular parties are, but I'm going to lake it in terms of people. Ricardo's Law of Comparative Advantage is that whenever you have two parties, each doing two things, and in the book I talk about manufacturing toothpaste and raising zebras, but for what we'll talk about here, I'll mow lawn or I'll paint houses. The law says that I have only one rational choice, given my skills and the skills of the opposing party, as to which one I should do 100% of the time. Not part-time each way. Now, if I can mow lawns and I can paint houses, it may turn out that I should be just painting houses. And it turns out that he, the other party, should just be mowing lawns. What is surprising about the law, the theorem of Ricardo's Law of Comparative Advantage is that even if I can mow lawns cheaper and better than he, and I can paint houses cheaper and better than he, there is only one thing I should be doing, of the two. That's Ricardos Law of comparative advantage, which means that the other guy who can't do either one as well as I still has the one choice, and he will be choosing the thing I don't choose. Very surprising law.
Mm-hmm.
I prove it, that law, in my economics book. I know of no other book on the market that proves it. I prove it.
Mm-hmm.
You want economics? I give you economics like crazy. It's been written.
Yeah. All right. Well, I will concede that my children are getting a better education than I am, and I should be going through. I read some of the younger ones, but I haven't gone through all of them. I've dipped my toes here and there, so probably I should go through them all and then remind myself of all the things that I could have learned, and then go on.
How young are the younger ones right now?
So I have an 11-year-old, a 9-year-old, a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 1-year-old.
Yeah, the 1-year-old is not getting much.
Yeah,
now.
Not yet. Yeah.
Okay.
So that pivots me.
Okay, now your next question.
Yeah, so I'd like to talk about basically like advanced education and the advisability or inadvisability of accelerated education. So to be clear, we don't need to worry at all in this context of the conversation. We don't need to worry at all about the problems of a classroom. I have enormous empathy with teachers who trying to teach 20 students, all of whom are at different levels and different abilities. That's very difficult. But I don't have to worry about that. I can just teach one student at a time. And so one of the questions I ask quite a lot is simply how much education or learning and studies should we encourage and require and encourage and then actually do. And so what I've settled on, since I could overwhelm my children with huge piles of stuff and destroy the fun and the joy of learning, I don't want to do that. I follow basically a Charlotte Mason philosophy of kind of how I try to approach their overall learning. I do my best to find the world's greatest resources for them, and then I limit the hours invested into the work to 5 hours, which is ironically what
that's the assignment my daughter did, remember?
The number that you also settled on. And basically, I look at it and I fill up the 5 hours, but I don't ever require anything more than the 5 hours. So the idea behind that is you have plenty of time. I'm not a bad parent just overloading you. But I want you in those 5 hours to learn as much as possible. And there are two elements to this that we have to think about. Number one is, what's the right time to introduce things? So at what age should a student start learning mathematics? At what age should a student start doing algebra? At what age should these things be introduced? That's a debate that I have a great deal of interest in because I've listened to a lot of math teachers give their thoughts on that. And then the second question is, how far should you go? So back to the basic thing is, should you just learn enough math to get an 800 on your SAT math scores and then be done? Or, hey, you did that when you were 13, so let's go ahead and now let's use these years and start exploring the Life of Fred curriculum that goes into the undergraduate years. And I'm seeing, not necessarily in kind of a school environment, but I see, because I follow this stuff, I see some schools and some parents that are exploring with teaching very advanced concepts, like advanced mathematics in even a high school environment. And I could tell you about some of those, but I think your books form a good foundation for that. Do you think that that's smart? Do you think it's good to go as far as you can, as soon as you can, or do you think that a student should be restrained for some reason?
Okay, I'm ready for those two questions. All right, first question. The right time to introduce new stuff. Excuse me. For parents that ask me in general, when should I introduce beginning algebra? In the college, the joke that we ran around in the math department was, if you've got hair under your arms, you're ready for beginning algebra. That was the standing joke kind of business, because the tiger moms that try to introduce algebra to
Right.
fifth graders,
Right.
is just absolutely obscene. On the other hand, I talk about adding 4y and 3y to get 7y. In the beginning books, I slip that in. 4y and 3y is 7y when they're learning addition. So there's a little touch of algebra there. But in general, when to introduce something depends not on the hair under your arms, but on the kid. And there are certain kids for whom, Carl Friedrich Gauss being one of them, you just let it rip as much as they want. And others, I had a 17-year-old that was corresponding with me, and he was starting fifth grade fractions, and he was having a tough time with it. So it depends so much on the kid. And what you have to do is pay attention to the particular child to find out the right time to introduce. That's the answer to your first question. The second question, how far to go? A lot of times, they will do that themselves. When my daughter was in her early teenage years, she found the Mishner books, which are thick novels, historical novels. And she read Mishner after Mishner, Hawaii and all the rest. I've forgotten the names of the rest of them. But she dug into that thing deeper than deep. And then she finished that up in her head and then went on to the next thing. In my life, how deep do I go? It depends on what I'm currently, electrifying to me. And artificial intelligence and genetic engineering, and the third one of quantum computing. Those three circles intersect strongly with each other, and they will greatly influence the next 5 years of your life and mine. Those three topics. And I've been reading. One book was on the combination of genetic engineering and artificial intelligence. Another book I read was on the combination of artificial intelligence and quantum computing. And I've just on and on read a whole bunch of stuff because that's of what's interest to me. And I go far into that right now. And so how far to go isn't that almost answers itself if you just let the kids, roll on without forcing and into the particular fields. You have to do some encouragement, or otherwise it become couch potatoes. But other than that, we'll just let it rip, and she will. When my daughter was in her fourth grade, I didn't know anything about sewing, but she was going to be. She's a female, and experience showing some kind of sewing stuff wouldn't hurt at all. So I took her off to the fabric store, and we looked around, and I found pattern for sewing a skirt, a blouse, 3/4 length on the arms, and a corresponding vest. Those three things. And I brought them home with the material. And I sat there at the machine reading the directions and learning how to sew. Now, some of this stuff, do you know what basting is in sewing?
Yes.
Okay. Most people think it's the turkey baster, but it's that loose stitch. Well, one of the directions on that sewing was fold under 5/8 of an inch and baste. You got it? Fold under 5/8 of an inch. Now I'm a mathematician. How much under 5/8 of an inch? Do you want 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 an inch? I misread it. And for 15 minutes, I couldn't figure out how much under they wanted it, rather than the idea of folding under rather than folding up. Stupid. But so I made her so that the skirt and the outside of the vest and the shirt matched, and the inside of the vest matched the other parts or whatever else. And I made her an outfit. This was dad loving daughter. And went back and I made a second outfit for her. I made 8 outfits with that same pattern. She wore them for at least 2 years to school every day. Dad made them. But she caught the bug on sewing. And when she was 13 years old, living with me in the A-frame in the woods, got out the sewing machine, and she started learning, self-educating, and was sewing stuff like crazy. She got to the point where she designed her own wedding dress without a pattern. It involved 1,000 yards of thread. That's a lot of thread. And sequins and the whole business, and made her own wedding dress. And that wedding dress ended up in the California State Fair exposition in the fashion building.
Wow.
She got that far.
That's amazing.
She's nuts about sewing.
Yeah.
Right now, she's working as doing dyeing of thread and selling that on the internet. And she'll buy, I think it was 50 kilograms of thread at a time. That's a lot of thread.
Yes.
Silk thread. And just, it changed her life.
Yeah.
How far do you want to go? Let the kid rip.
Yeah.
As much as they want to. And it's just, it's fun to watch it. And you watch it in your own life, Joshua. The stuff that has caught your imagination, and you go run with it.
Yeah.
That's the answer to your second question.
Yeah. I look forward to the time 10 years from now, and perhaps have a little more experience going through this process with teenagers. I'm trying right now to strike a balance. I'm a great admirer of the unschoolers who proclaim the benefits of self-directed education, and there's no question that when a student has a real interest in something and even an obsession, it makes everything easier, because he or she is going to go as far as possible, as quickly as possible. And as a parent or a teacher or a facilitator, you don't have to do much. All you got to do is just keep providing the supplies and sit back and enjoy watching the student go far. On the other hand, I'm not an unschooler, and I think we have a responsibility to expose our children to a broad array of information and subjects, and to make certain that they're competent, that our students are competent in those things that are necessary for success in modern life, whether they want to or not. And so finding that balance is tricky, and it's tricky, but it's necessary.
Oh, absolutely. But you do it sort of underhandedly. You got to be a sneaky parent. I've had kids. My kids have gone through the teenage years, but during the teenage years, now your kids, at 11 down through 1 are very malleable. You're still, sort of the God figure. Mm-hmm. When you become teenagers, you are the opponent. When my daughter and she's 13, how do you manage her, upcoming, adventures and rebellion and all of this stuff? Stuff is a synonym for the real word that can come down the line. And so I gave her 4 rules that were the rules that she had to follow when she was going to be living with me. The 4 rules were not to get killed, not to get maimed, not to get pregnant, and not to get tattooed. Because each of those were permanent. They'll wreck you up for the rest of your life.
Indeed.
So I wanted those things to be the rules. Everything else, you want to stay up late at night, go ahead. When the morning rolls around, God and your body will punish you if necessary, but I'm not going to punish you. You stay up as late as you like. When she was in late teenage times, when do I have to come back home? I said, I go to bed at 9. If you come home after 9, please don't wake me. Was my statement. I gave them much freedom on that side. But those 4 rules, my daughter is now is 50 years old plus, and she can still recite those 4 rules. But it made it gave a there's where the boundaries were. And I didn't have the teenage rebellion that people who micromanage their kids try to do during teenage years. That's my hint to pass along.
Yeah.
On that stuff. But the unschooling, there's this stuff, but you have to kind of slip it in, just like I slipped the math in. to the poor people. When your kids, read the Life of Fred's story first. I mean, that's the sugar in the Life of Fred, is Fred's adventures. But Mary Poppins wasn't wrong. A spoonful of sugar doesn't hurt.
Absolutely.
She was right. And I just load the sugar on as much as I can.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I have a couple of, first, I'd like to test one of my ideas with you and just
oh my gosh,
kind of see if you see what you think and see if you can pick it apart or if you agree, or I don't know. And then I have a couple more questions. But one of my ideas is, with regard to education, is basically this: everything is easy the third time through. And what I mean by that is that when I went through high school math, I did well up through Algebra 2 and geometry, and then I just got completely lost. I wandered my way through calculus. I did not understand it. I took AP Calculus. I got a 2 on my AP Calculus exam. Then I went to college, and because I had gotten a 2 on my AP Calculus exam, I had to get a math credit for college. I was like, well, I just took calculus. I'll just sign up for calculus again. And so I signed up for calculus again. I think I got a C in the class. I passed it, got my math credit, but I just did terribly at it. And in hindsight, looking back, I have realized that one of the reasons I did so poorly in calculus was, well, partly I didn't have enough practice. I got lost, and I never had good study skills to catch up. I didn't understand how to think. Anyway, there were various things, but one of the reasons I did poorly was it was my first time through. And I realized, if I had taken AP Calculus 3 times through, then by the third time around, I probably would have gotten it. I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but I probably could get something by the third time through. And I think about that with all of my classes, that if we get through something, if we take a class 3 times, then by the third time through, it's probably going to be pretty easy. And so one of the basic problems that I have, or one of the basic faults that I observe in the way that we do education, the standard model of education in government schools, is the siloing of concepts. So you have biology one year, then you have chemistry the next year, or in the math sequence, although this is changing now because people are going to integrated math, but you have algebra, and then you go to geometry, and then by the time you get to algebra 2, you've forgotten algebra 1, and so everything has to be refreshed, and we treat things as kind of distinct silos. And my idea is, what we should do is instead go through algebra 3 times over, or go through biology 3 times over. That in the elementary years, you should have a complete biology course, and you're going to remember and learn maybe 20% of it. And then you should have a complete biology course in your middle years, and you're going to now have maybe 40% of biology. And then you're going to go through it again in your high school years, and now maybe you're going to master 60 or 70% of the material, but that's going to be far ahead of the person who just has 1 biology class in high school and 1 biology class in high school and gets 20% of it. So I think this should be the basic approach that we have. If we're working with 12 years, then we should be taking our students steadily and consistently through these different areas, and that the third time through, it's probably going to be pretty easy for them to master it. But in order to do that, we have to approach subjects in a more integrated way. We have to weave the concepts in. We have to recognize that it may be perfectly appropriate for a 16-year-old to sit and work through a 500-page biology textbook, but that's not appropriate for the 6-year-old. So we need to put a little more sugar in it, put a little more story in it, and engage with the concepts. So do you think I'm on the right track with that idea? It seems like that resonates with how you approach your books even.
You give me a lot of places to grab onto. With regard to many of the books in the middle stuff from fractions onwards, I have zillions of practice problems, fractions, and zillions of practice problems, decimals and percents, zillions of practice problems, biology, and beginning algebra. There's 7 books like that. And each of those for the students that need more work, they can get these secondary books. And I say that these books are strictly optional, but those books are sit there, and they can provide more repetition. My favorite book of the 64 books is Zillions of Practice Problems, Pre-Algebra 2 with Economics. Because in that book, I start a different story with Lucy, who was born in one of the books, who is wildly engaged in creating a railroad, a national railroad. And at the age of 1 and 2 and 3, she does more stuff to build that railroad that she's going to do. It's incredible. She gets railroad stations started in the rest. She has a whole story that's wound up in that one book. And I do a lot of, more economics. And my chapters in that book match the chapters in the original book. So that's one way to do the repetition. Number two, when parents say, well, I've done the 13 books up through Mineshaft, from Apples to Mineshaft, the alphabetized ones, and my kid is not yet in the 5th grade, should I push on? And I'm not sure. And I say, go back and do them again. And the kids, very often, they don't have any objections for going and doing apples, butterflies, cats, dogs, and so on a second time. I look at kids who go to the movies and they've seen the same Star Trek movie or Star Wars movie 13 times. Kids can do that. They are very naturally adapted to seeing the same stuff over and over again. So that's not a push that's hard to do for us parents to make that happen. In terms of calculus and the rest, when I took calculus, it's 4 semesters long. My final grades in the 4 semesters were A, C, B, C. This is a guy who then, as a junior, became a math major. I hated calculus. And one reason I chose to write calculus as my first book in the Life of Fred series is I hated calculus. And I was going to turn that around, which I did. But why do teachers know this stuff so much better than the students do? Is they've done it, like Joshua said many times. And they do it 3 ways. They say it, they see it, they write it on the board. And that makes a big difference in terms of learning. I saw once when I was at Berkeley, and there was a vacant classroom, and I passed it, and some guy at the blackboard was explaining some concept. I forgot what the subject was, but there was nobody in the room. He was teaching it to an empty classroom, and he says, "This way, I really learn it." And so that's one way to make the multiple round trips through a book.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a bunch of ideas.
Absolutely. What you said you have grandchildren? How old are your grandchildren?
2 of them are in college, and 2 of them are getting ready for college.
Okay. What if you were starting over, right? You're 80 years old. You've been a professor.
That's correct. Nobody knew that before you said it.
You're 80 years old. You've been a professor. You have raised children. You've raised grandchildren. And you have been educating young people and children for a very long time now.
I have tens of thousands of kids.
Yeah.
That I've educated. Many children I have.
Broadly speaking, do you have some mental models or some structures as to how you think parents today should approach the education of their children?
Yeah, don't go to college unless it's a STEM major. Do a lot of loving. Listen to the kids. Pay attention to their abilities. No 2 kids. You notice that with your 5 kids. They're not alike. They provide different challenges to Joshua, and they're going to provide many more when they hit teenage years and individuate even more severely. And you can't teach them all alike. And some may be book learners, and some may be wanting to get out there and tear apart, the engine in the garage. and you have to pay attention to that. But just you love them and love them and love them intelligently.
Excellent. Is there anything else that I should have asked you about that I haven't? Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us as we close out?
Wow. Not really. The Life of Fred books have been my central part of my experience, and that they are fun, that they are comprehensive, that there's more math in these Life of Fred books, these fun Life of books, than any other homeschooling curriculum that I know about. These have tons of math in there. They are motivating because it's Fred's life that they read about, and then he needs math, and then we do it. When I was teaching high school, the question, when are we ever going to use this algebra, was a big question I got all the time. This answers that. And they are cheap. The Life of Fred books, I was looking today on the internet for beginning algebra books, and there was the books, the beginning algebra book by Richard Altman was $93, and the Margaret Lyer book was $239. The list price for the McDougall book was $144. One more to go here. The third edition for the Saxon book was list price of $215, and my book is $49, and I pay the postage.
And you have all the answers in there.
Yeah, that's true.
It's what drives me crazy is you buy a book and it doesn't have the answers, and you have to buy a second book with the answers in it.
So that's the reason Life of Fred is. I have not advertised at all, and the paid a dime for advertising, and I haven't done many interviews. This is a news thing to me. But we've sold in every state in the union and 72 foreign countries by word of mouth. This is incredible.
Outstanding.
So that's my life. Joshua, this has been a lot of fun.
It's as a very satisfied user, as I opened the show with, thank you for doing it. I do hope you'll write more books. Have you considered writing a book on theology, apologetics, or philosophy at all?
Okay, there are 3 people in the world that know at this point, and now it's going to be 1,000 people. A book about theology. I'm a seminary, long distance seminary, distance learning.
Mm-hmm.
I've just completed my dissertation thesis, 141 pages, for a doctorate in divinity.
Okay.
My brother doesn't even know this yet.
Congratulations.
So yes, I'm going to write this theology stuff.
I hope that Fred, you'll create a Fred book on it, because I personally believe that there is a perfect synchronicity between math, science, and philosophy and theology, and that the idea that these things are disconnected is one of the things that harms both our philosophy and theology as well as our science. And so someone like you, who has laid a beautiful foundation with books on math and science, I think is clearly well educated and well read on the topics of philosophy and theology. I think it would be wonderful to have a Fred book on this. And you've already proven with your language arts books that Fred doesn't only have to do math. So I'd love to have that on your list as well.
Okay, I do have prayers at 8:30, 104 prayers that I've written, which are not the prayers like you see in most. They talk about the love songs of the universe that God is, or washing dishes in the hotel kitchen in Detroit, or if our calendars read 60 BC, or mud and broken glass, or you are not the wimp that hides behind the wallpaper. Exciting prayers.
Right.
That's in the website also.
Excellent.
And that's a start for the theology parts.
Good.
I've given sermons in various churches, whether it's Methodist, Presbyterian, Congregationalist, Unitarian. I've given over 40 Sunday sermons over the years in various churches.
Great.
And they're all in writing now.
Excellent.
So that's an important part of my life.
Good. Well, Mr. Schmidt, thank you for coming on Radical Personal Finance. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I will link.
Bye-bye, Joshua.
I will link to Mr. Schmidt's websites. Lifeoffred.com is where you can order his books. You can see the full catalog of math books. The catalog of math books begins with the very earliest of ages, goes on through middle school, goes on through high school mathematics, and then continues further to, as he said, an undergraduate, all of the undergraduate math courses as well. A book on real analysis, linear algebra, abstract algebra, some upper division math, and complex analysis, numerical analysis, and metamathematics. And I don't know what any of those things are. But his book on financial choices, if you only get one book, obviously, with here at Radical Personal Finance, I would urge you to get Life of Fred, Financial Choices. As of now, it is the best book that I have found for if you're doing a homeschool curriculum for your child on personal finance and life decisions, or if you're just trying to supplement with a good personal finance approach for your middle school or high school child, get Life of Fred, Financial Choices. And then he also has a chemistry book, statistics book, and logic book. You can find all those at lifeoffred.com. Also, his personal website at stanleyschmidt.com, stanleyschmidt.com, both of those linked in the show notes. Thank you all for listening, and I'll be back with you very soon.